Hey, welcome to Metro Community Church. My name is Seth Conerly. I'm the campus and teaching pastor. We're glad to have you with us today. What an awesome way to get service started, by the way. I was feeling it, loving it. It was amazing. And I feel like stepping out of that moment and into the next, it's appropriate for us to start this in prayer. So if you'd bow your heads with me as we dive in. Father in heaven, I thank you that you are a God who saw fit to send your Son into the world to die for my sins, for our sins. And I pray that we can experience you in this time together. And I pray for transformation in lives. I pray for your peace in situations that don't make sense to have peace. I pray for love to be permeating in the lives of those here, and that we can gain a better understanding of who you are by diving into your word today. We love you so much, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, hey, we've got an interesting one today. This is kind of the culmination of a year, right? I mean, it's the last one. It's the last one for us before we hit 2020, and that's a weird, daunting task whenever your head pastor looks at you and goes, Seth, you got this, right? Knuckles. He's like, yeah, you're going to knock it out of the park, buddy, no pressure. And so as I was contemplating on this and thinking about it, I was very prayerful and thinking through kind of what that looks like. What do you talk about? Well, there's a few go-tos, if we're being honest, right? There's the end of the year reflective one. And I think I gave this talk last year, and I did the reflective deal. I was like, let's think back on 2018. Wow, what a great year. We just did the whole reflective thing. Sometimes it's the looking forward. Next year's coming. Make it everything. New Year's resolutions that you're going to give up in 2 weeks. Yeah, we're going to do that deal. Maybe for you, it's a little bit of an ambiguous week, a little bit of a kind of caught in between. Christmas just happened, right? For churches, it's definitely a caught in between week. You've got this just explosive Christmas service. It's like, Jesus is born, blah, blah. Everybody's freaking out. And then after that, it's like, New Year's is coming. We'll start a series next week, though. And so we've got this kind of floater deal. And the question I had was, what in the world do I do with it? And here's the other side note to that. Most of the time you hit the New Year's resolutions, and if you were with us last time I talked, you remember that I talked all about our bodies and giving those as worship, and we talked about all of the ways in which we need to be making healthy decisions for the glory of God. That's the New Year's talk. That's the New Year's resolutions talk, but I already gave it. So what do I do? And also, P.S., I apologize retroactively for that talk's timing. It was like a week before Thanksgiving and then Christmas on the back end. And you were like, you looked at the turkey with guilt this year. That's just what it boiled down to in the wake of that talk, because that's what happened to me. And so as we go through this and we were studying, and it just kind of hit me like a bolt of lightning what I wanted us to talk about. And it's this idea that we build so much so to this Christmas narrative last week that we focus so much on it that sometimes that which came right after we don't think about. We don't process. We look at what is the culmination of the Old Testament prophecies, all put 350 plus prophecies pointing to this Messiah, and we're rejoicing, but there's a lot of the in-between between the birth and the death and the resurrection. And what specifically, right after Jesus is born, what happened? And what does that look like? And so we're going to look at that today, and what we're going to see is this subject of relational wisdom, interestingly enough. As I began to study the passage, we're going to be in Matthew 2. And so you could turn there if you want, but we'll be in Matthew 2. And so the two kind of parallel narratives that you see of the Christmas story, the predominant one that you've heard on repeat for every year of your life is Luke 2. Luke 2 tells us this great Mary and Joseph, they're on the donkey and they're going to Bethlehem and they're in a manger and it's like, what? And then the baby's here and it's great, it's shepherds and it's like, it's awesome. And so that's what, but what we don't necessarily look at is the next. And what the next is in Matthew 2. And we see an instance of relational wisdom being the thing that comes to the forefront of this. And I think that it's very appropriate. And this is why. Relational wisdom is a very specific subject matter that has massive ramifications on your life and mine. And I'm willing to bet that if you can get that right, if you can figure it out and take some steps towards health in that regard, that 2020 is going to be amazing. It's going to be transformational for you, the people, and the relationships in your life, and it will catapult you into a year you're not even ready for because of all the amazing things that could be in front of you if you can get this taken care of. So let's dive in and see what it is. So we're going to be looking at this narrative of Matthew 2. Now, relational wisdom, before we do that, we probably need to identify let's do some baseline kind of definitions that we're working from, right? Wisdom being from just a very universally understood perspective is this concept of, through experience, through the gaining of knowledge, whether it be influence of other people in a positive manner in your life, you take all of that and you apply it in a positive way in your life. It's that living out of this knowledge in your life. It's very wise. A biblical definition of wisdom, if you were to look at biblical definition, would be something along these lines: the ability to make sound decisions that result in a life that glorifies God. And a short way of saying that would be righteousness lived out. It's taking what is God's word, it's taking what it is that you are taught through those things, internalizing it, and then living that out. It's wise. That is very biblically wise living. But then what is the next step towards relational wisdom? Well, obviously, it's taking that concept of wisdom and applying it to the relationships in our lives, whether that be friendships, whether that be family members, whether that be a romantic role, whatever the thing is that you're working with. And so this is the definition that I found, a formal definition, if you will, of this. It's very textbook. It's the ability to discern emotions, interests, and abilities in yourself and others, to interpret this information in the light of your personal values, and to use these insights to manage your responses and relationships constructively. Y'all stop listening to me after the third word. That's what that boiled down to. That is very wordy. And what we're going to do is expound upon this from a biblical perspective. It's this idea of taking this relational EQ, this emotional intelligence in your life, recognizing things in other people, responding to them in a very smart, a very wise way, knowing that you have the proper boundaries and things in place with the relationships in your life, knowing that who the influencers are in your life matter, and having those things be the way they need to in those relationships, all things that come to your relationships, and are you funneling them through wise decisions? And so that's what we're going to be looking at. And I'll tell you, this is manifested in my life at very key moments. I would say a lot of what is relational wisdom is pretty obviously based on those who have initially influenced you relationally. So a lot of influencers in your life, the most obvious which maybe be your parents, whoever raised you, whatever that looked like for. Maybe it was your grandparents that raised you. Maybe it was all sorts of situations in your life of just different people who were influenced. Maybe it was a teacher. Whatever that looks like for you, these influencers poured into you this expectation of what relationships, interactions are supposed to look like. You might be sitting here today going, I'm still figuring that out because of all the messed up stuff I had to deal with relationally through all the formative years of my life, Seth. That's where I'm at right now, and I'm just trying to play catch up. That's what it boils down to. Because everybody I dealt with in the formative years were like, you want to know what relational wisdom is? I don't know either, because I'm just going to treat you horribly. Like that's maybe was your narrative. And as we look at this, we recognize really quickly who were the people who showed us this the most. So for me, I think of a number of instances in my life. For one, I think of the different ways in which my parents tried to guide me if I would listen to them. And I was very thankful that in a couple of moments I did. Not all of them, but some that were pretty key. I'll tell you, parents, if you're in the room, you probably can relate to this. You are very concerned about the children that your children hang out with and the houses they come from and the influences that may be inflicted upon your child, right? As I was growing up, there was a number of different guys I hung out with that were really great friends of mine. There was a guy I lived, this is going to sound just further redneckery of who I am. If you ever need any more solidification, every time I step up here, I just give you more evidence. But the guy who lived across the pond from me, Lord help, we hung out a good bit. I know, I'm Opie. I get it. And so we'd go fishing together and catch some big mouth bass and some brim. Y'all don't call them brim here. You call them bluegill. Whatever. You're wrong. And so we'd go fishing and hang out. And he seemed to be, I mean, we had a great time, and it was a good time, but what I was unaware of as a child is the context in which he was living. The family that was raising him were in a vastly different mindset of what life needed to look like, what things should be prioritized, the way one should live. And for them, it was very much not like, and very much far away from what would be God glorifying, let alone right in many instances, even by any definition. So there's a lot of issues there. So my family was very concerned that, sure, as a kid, this is fine. But when Seth gets to teenage years and personalities develop more, influences change, people begin to get a heart for different things, that Seth might be influenced in a negative way. There was another guy that I played soccer with. We played with all the time. We hung out. It was great. We did that Power Ranger life. We were just studying it up, and we all wanted to be the Green Ranger. It was what it was. He was a good friend. But as time progressed, it became very evident that the priorities of their household were different. Now, does this mean we don't love these people? Does this mean we don't, socially interact with them, hang out with them in different instances? No, but the question is of an influencer. Who are the people who are the most primary influencers? And these were my closest friends at the time. So logic would dictate, as I go to middle school and high school, they would influence me. And so my parents did some pretty difficult things at different moments that I didn't understand. And they'd say, Seth, we love you, but we're going to have to kind of take a little bit of a different direction here. And they gave me the why behind it, which I was thankful for. Didn't fully understand, but I loved them and I trusted them, so I walked in it. Well, both of those individuals who were my best friends at the time ended up not only going down some really rough paths, but ending in drug rehab and all sorts of things when they were just 15, 16, and 17 years old. Now, my hope and prayer is that they've kind of come full circle and are now turned to the Lord in the midst of this. But in what are the very formative years of their lives, my parents had the discernment to understand what was potentially what they were going to walk into, and inevitably it happened. And they didn't want that to be the core of my influences in a world in which I didn't understand what that even meant yet. I was too young. I didn't understand what that looked like. I just was absorbing everything like a sponge. There's other instances for me, I think back on, as I got towards those middle school years, and I don't know if this was your story, I hated them. They were like middle school is that awkward transition where your body turns you into a mutant and you don't know what to do from that point on. You're like, what is happening? Oh! Like in your voice, you just don't know what's going on. And now you're trying to learn how to be social with other people. And you're just like, are Power Rangers still cool? I feel like they are, but apparently they're not. Girls don't like that. And so like, you're just trying to figure out who the mess you are. I've referenced Power Rangers way too much already in this talk. Like, does he still like Power Rangers a lot? A little bit. Side story. No, don't worry about it. But as it boils down, middle school is this place where you're going, who in the world am I? And who are the people who I can connect with? And I couldn't find that. And thankfully, I got connected to my church, and I was getting connected to a student ministry there. And I found a lot of people who were very much positive. We got an amazing friend group. But I had to be careful at times, depending on at school and stuff like that, because there were still all those pockets of reality. I still ran into what would be the locker room conversations constantly. And things would go very south very quickly in those narratives if I didn't know how to have proper relational wisdom, even at that age. But thankfully, there were positive people in my life influencing me, speaking into my life, giving me that wisdom that I lacked myself. And thankfully at different moments. Now, that doesn't mean I did it perfect every time, because I can tell you that right now. But thankfully at a few key ones, there were those moments. And maybe for you, the first step in this whole conversation is identifying who those people are. And if you don't have them, how you need to find them in your own life. What does that look like for you, though? What are some ways in which relational wisdom manifests in any of our lives? So we said who are your influencers, but here's another one. Do you have proper boundaries in your relationships? Or or is it just anybody has unfettered, complete access to you in every way, form, and fashion at any given moment? Do you have healthy boundaries with your family, with your children? With your parents and your family? Do you have it with your relationships and your friendships? Or do they just kind of get an all-access passes to you and they just have massive expectations in you that are not something that is realistic for you to meet? What about your romantic ones? Maybe you're dating, or maybe you have this perception of what dating needs to look like in your singleness right now, and you may or may not be setting yourself up for a win or for a failure depending on that. Or if you're in a dating relationship or something like, what is that boundary like? Are there any? What about if it's not relational at all, but it's just boundaries when it comes to people? You know, that person who you're married, but that person kind of tends to flirt with you at work a lot, and you like it. It makes you feel good. And so you just kind of act like it's no big deal. And you maybe even participate here and there, and things begin to devolve, and that's where other things are created. Negativity, the things that just destroy instead of build up relationally, begin to come to the forefront in your life. Here's another one when it comes to relational wisdom. Do you communicate well? Do you have empathy in that? Are you looking to other people and going, what do they need from me? Am I saying this right to them? Or are they hearing this in a way? Are they hearing my heart when I'm communicating this? Or is it just kind of, you're like, well, I said what I need to say and they can get over it. Whatever they feel, I know how I feel. They're fine. Whatever. How does that, are you relationally being wise in the way you're communicating, interacting with people? Are you thinking of other people's relational well-being in your interactions? Do you have that empathy? Are you extending trust, but doing it in a manner that is not irresponsible? Right? So and we're going to see this one in particular play out pretty aggressively in this narrative we're about to dive into. But it's this idea of, do you just initially trust someone and consequently set yourself up to be in a vulnerable place of being taken advantage of? Or are you taking the time to know them before you completely trust? Or the converse of that, are you just building such massive walls up that it doesn't matter how much someone proves themselves to you, relationally or otherwise, you won't extend trust? Where do you find yourself in this conversation? Well, here's your takeaway statement. So if you this is the hypothesis, if you will, the bottom line that we're looking at above all this that we're hoping to get away from. And it's this: if we wish to demonstrate relational wisdom, then we must understand how our personal calling to follow Jesus is in alignment or contrast with the people in our lives. Now, this is very clearly geared towards someone who is a follower of Jesus. So maybe at the forefront of this conversation, you've got to come to grips with where you are with Jesus, if you're anywhere at all with him. And being a follower of Christ, what does that look like for you? But if that's something you want to endeavor in, if you want to have everything that comes from that is being a follower of Christ, you have to understand that it will affect every relationship in your life. And you got to be prepared for that. Because in some of them, they're going to be very amazing, very fulfilling. You're a part of this church community all of a sudden. You've accepted Jesus. People are loving on you in ways you didn't understand. They're just encouraging you, walking alongside you. That's amazing. But the people who you kind of did life with up to that point, especially if it was very different than what you're wanting to live now, are not going to understand it. They're going to have a little bit of an identity crisis when it comes to you. And they're going to be like, you've changed. What's wrong with you? And they're not going to receive it well. So how do you then interact with those relationships in a good, positive way, let alone one that points them towards Christ? And how do you find these positive influences? What does all this look like? And so as we get into this, I'm tripling down on this idea because I want you to understand how significant this is for your life and mine. And if we overlook it, we're going to be in trouble. As I said, we're going to be in Matthew 2, so you can go and turn there. I'll give you some context on this passage and Matthew in general. So we're talking about the story we're talking right after the birth of Jesus, more or less, the wise men or the magi, okay? Now, I might shake up a little bit of your understanding of Christmas today. So, sorry in advance. And the reason for that is this: the way that we have pop culturized the birth of Jesus in animated movies and general things that we see and hear, and even songs that are classics, it's actually not really what happened in the Bible. Great examples. Mary and Joseph didn't follow a star.
Fun fact, they did not sit on a donkey and like a cool drummer boy song played in the background and they followed a star all the way across the desert alone to like that didn't happen. Like that's not, I know it was in all the animated classics and you're like, you're breaking my childhood. What is happening right now? It didn't happen. The shepherds did not follow a star. Angels appeared to them, told them where to go, told them what to look for, and they headed to Bethlehem and they found them in the manger, but there wasn't a star for them. The narrative of the star applies to this conversation today of Matthew 2 with the wise men. Another thing that I'm going to break up for you is with three kings of Orient high. They weren't kings. We don't have any evidence to prove that. Wise men, magi, those are the interpretations of the Greek there, but that is not something we see. It isn't until later church tradition that this concept of kings even really came up, and they're speculative. They even named it. Here's where I'm going to even get more messed up with you. We've got no evidence to prove there were three of them. The only thing that we see there is that there are three gifts. That's all it says. So for all we know, it's a whole host of it. It's these guys that are coming with like a whole host of people. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6 of them. Maybe it's one guy that was like, I got you 3 gifts. Who knows? It's plural, so it's at least 2. But like, what we kind of mess it up at times with because it's not as cutesy. And so there's these wise men, these Gentiles, these non-Jewish thinking people, okay? The Jews were the ones who had been prophesying about this Messiah coming. And they're like, he's coming. It's going to be awesome. Gear up. And they missed it. If you look at the narrative, when we see right here that we're going to read, they are consulted. Herod goes to the religious leaders, the Jewish leaders, and goes, hey, when the Messiah comes, like when all this happens, where's he going to be? They're like, Bethlehem. That's where he's going to be. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to Bethlehem. They're like, I don't know why you're going to Bethlehem. What's that all about? And he's like, did I just ask you where the Messiah was? Like, it probably means that, never mind, don't worry about it. And then he's going to, they're apathetic. They don't even think twice about it. And the people who are coming to worship at the throne of Jesus are Gentiles who have had no part in this prophetic situation going on. They're not Jews. And so we're going to see a story unfold right now. That's pretty crazy. Let me mess this up for you again as well. There's no evidence to prove that the wise men went to the manger. Sorry about that. Like that's not, I know you put them with your manger in your living room every year. They're not there. They aren't. They're like, we're talking months, if not a year to 2 years away from being there. And it's not even going to be at the manger. Like, I'm sorry, like you need to build like another little house on the other side of your house and put the wise men there and just say 2 years later. Like that's what you need to have. And then have the wise men coming up and rolling into this situation. Because even the Greek we see used there, the Greek in Luke 2 talks about an infant and a baby. And the Greek that's talking about a child in Matthew 2 is talking about this infant, this child. And so there's all this context that is very different than what we have popularized and even come to understand. And if we're not careful, we'll go, no, like this is the way it was, right? Some of you are like, I'm going to go, I don't know about you, Pastor. I'm going to go read them verses whenever I get home. I remember they were kings. Yeah. So as we dive in, this is what's going on. And these wise men are going to go to follow this star and meet this coming Messiah. Matthew 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Interesting fun fact. Herod, who is kind of a Roman official that's overseeing this, is at this point, his title is King of Judea. So he is, for all intents and purposes, the king of the Jews. He oversees the Jewish people. He governs them. He is a king, and he is king of the land in which they reside. So think of like if you went up as a foreign official to the Queen of England and you were like, can you tell me where the Queen of England is that I have come to kind of worship at the feet of? she's going to be like, what are you talking about? Get out of here. You are insulting me greatly. Off with her head. That's Alice in Wonderland, not the British. Never mind. She's going to be very offended, right? This guy, who, if we look back, is a pretty horrible dude, is going to be extra offended. But watch what this guy does. Herod does not respond like you might think. He should be offended. Get out of my throne room. Get out of here. Who even think you are? I am the king. So it says this. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So when he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. So he's bringing in the pastors of all pastors. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly. So he brings them to, he's like, hey, come here. We don't have to put this on the record. Come over here. And found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Understand, he's trying to figure out the age of this child, what's going on, when did this appear? Let me kind of figure out this timetable. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Here's the deal. You think Game of Thrones has got some political intrigue, all right? Read the Bible, friend. Like, it's got some crazy stuff throwing down. This dude is a snake in the grass who is trying to mess these dudes up. He is trying to act like I'm here for you. I think all this stuff's in play. But I want to worship too. I'm right there with you. We're on the same team. But secretly, there's something else going on. And he wants them to report back because, as we're going to see, it's because he wants to kill Jesus. He doesn't want this usurper, this king of the Jews, to get in the head of the people and start revolution and overthrow his power. So as we look at this, we're going to be looking at four things. And specifically, there are going to be four things we must understand about relational wisdom as we look at this narrative of the wise men. Because unfortunately, there's a couple of things they're going to do as wise men that isn't particularly wise. One, relational wisdom requires that we be watchful for false intentions. So these magi walk in, they're interacting with Herod. Everything looks pretty good on paper. He's a king. He seems super intentional with us. Like, he cares about this too. He didn't freak out when we said that. They look like, hey, Belteshazzar, that was kind of a really rough thing to say to the king. Could you not say that again to him? Because he's probably going to kill us. Don't worry. I think he's cool. He wants to worship too. Like, he's cool. We're good. And so they're thinking everything's going according to plan. But unfortunately, we're going to see that pan out in a very negative way here shortly. So they're going to go and try to find this Jesus. And then surely going to report back to the king, because surely everybody wants to celebrate this in this area. If the Messiah was born here, we came from far to worship this guy. Surely the people in this surrounding area just are going to rejoice. It literally said that all of Judea was concerned. Herod was concerned, and all of it, they weren't like, we're rejoicing. There was concern. Can I tell you that when you step into these moments of extending trust, you need to extend trust, but you need to do it in a wise way relationally. I'll give you an example. When I came on staff here, so I've been on staff, April will be 2 years, and when I came on staff in April, do you think that Paul Westbrook, the founding pastor of this church, whose heart and soul has been poured into this place for decades, looked at me and said, here are all these ministries to oversee. Do it tomorrow. Go and be blessed. No, he didn't do that. He saw a resume, he interacted with me a few times, and he needed to make sure that beyond what he felt as the right next step, I wasn't full of it. That I wasn't just all show on the front, that there was actual substance, there was a heart for Jesus, there was a heart for ministry, that I was ethical, that I was a person that wanted to lead in a way that glorified God and was biblically the way. He needed to know that and see that, and that's something that took a little time. So the places of influence that I step into, the people that I work with that are on my team, they weren't from the get-go. Why? Because you have a wise pastor in Paul. He said, we're going to walk into this easily. We're going to do it not easily from a standpoint of making it just easy for me, but with ease, with gradual moving towards. Because if you're going to do that, you have to make sure, if you want to extend trust, you can't do it blindly. But you still need to do it. And so that's what he did. It's an amazing example, and I will always remember it as I want to be a wise leader myself, as I want to be a person who is a positive, wise influencer in other people's lives. Matthew 2:9. Let's keep going. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. So once again, he's coming to a house, not a manger. That's a pretty big indicator right there as well. And they bowed down and worshiped him. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream that not to go back to Herod, so they're warned by the Lord, hey, P.S., this guy's a liar. This is not going to go well for you. Probably don't go back and report to him about Jesus, because we want Jesus to live so that he can be the Messiah that he is called to be. Having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Now here's an interesting one that happens right there. We would have a very different Bible if the wise men had done what? Returned to Herod. Potentially. Now, you'll see some other things at play right here. God always has a plan, and he can work through even in those situations, and I'll point that out in a second. But it would have gone very poorly by our logical standards. They go back to him, and they send a big old troop of people, and they kill off baby Jesus, would be what we think would be the next step. So this is point 2 I want you to not miss, and it's this. And so initially, the wise men did something unwise. They extended trust blindly. But they did something very wise, which if you find yourself in a position of vulnerability relationally or otherwise, this has got to be the response you're willing to make. And it says, relational wisdom requires that we respond to God's guidance. See, they have this kind of dream that comes to effect. It says, hey, don't go back to Herod. Don't be listening to what's going on. There's other things at play here. And God redirects their paths. And they find themselves going back because they recognized that they needed to heed the warning of God and follow a different path than the one they were already walking. Hello. Is that anybody else out there? Have you been trudging down a very specific path with influencers and people and things that have been supposedly under the guise of your betterment? But God has intervened in some way in your life. Maybe it's through a person. Maybe it's through you came to our Christmas services and you went, I got to change something. I need this Jesus situation because what I'm doing isn't working. Is there something that's occurred and it's going to change the trajectory of your path to one that is safer, one that is better, and one that leads to what God has in store? They went another route. Matthew 2, verse 13. Let's keep cruising. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph. Okay, so this is Mary and Joseph, mother of Jesus, adopted father of Jesus. He appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. So when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Remember, he said, hey, when was that star? When did you first see it? He's timelining it. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. This is a significant chapter because we're talking about 3 pretty severe, intense prophecies being fulfilled through the actions that are going on here that have heralded this coming Messiah. It says this: a voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. And this is the sad one, okay? This point is not a fun one. Point 3 is this: a lack of relational wisdom can result in adverse consequences. God was able to intervene. He was able to change the trajectory of these Magi's path, get them away from this deal, but there were still consequences. If they hadn't gone to Herod, if they hadn't told him about this Messiah, if they hadn't trusted him in the first place when they shouldn't have, there is great evidence to prove that this probably wouldn't happen. If he had no idea it was happening, if nobody had come to him or gone to the area and said all this, there's no reason for us to believe that Herod would have gone, oh, we need to kill all these babies at this specific time based on this timeline for 2 years of younger in the town of Bethlehem. Now, for perspective for you, historians and theologians think that Bethlehem was around 1,000 people in population. Very small little town, maybe a little bit more when you give some surrounding areas. And this would be during a non-census time. So Jesus was born during his census time. And this is past that time, a little bit later. And so most likely we're talking about 1,000, a little more than 1,000. For perspective, our Vandalia people are tuning in with us. Vandalia, as of right now, according to the census I looked at, is sitting roughly somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 people in its populace. Now, if you're familiar with Vandalia and our Vandalia folks, y'all probably look at it, Vandalia's going, we're not this just massive exploding metropolitan area. But they're like 8 times larger than Bethlehem, okay? Bethlehem's like where my daddy grew up in Osaka, Mississippi is where it is, okay? There's a stop sign because they downgraded the blinking red light. Bethlehem's like old school Osaka is what it is. And it's small. And so what it boils down to is, sure, that means probably there weren't a ton of babies and infants between the ages of 0 and 2 that were being killed in this moment. I think a lot of times when we study this, we think it was just like thousands of babies were like, that isn't necessarily what's at play. But death is at play. And consequences are at play. And there was a generation of people in the city of Bethlehem that would not see progression in their households in a patriarchal society where that is a huge deal. And it would go real bad for them as they lost their sons. Because someone they extended trust without first understanding if the person was for them, for the Lord, wanting to worship in sincerity. And they were taken advantage of. Let's keep going. 2:19 through 23. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. So yet again, and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead. So he got up, took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. So 4, understand that we have multiple prophecies that are fulfilled in this narrative. Even in the wake of people doing really unwise things. Okay? Which brings us to our final point. It's this. When we face consequences, we must look for God's guidance and his plan. Because here's the deal. You live in a fallen world. And the actions you participate, the things you do have consequences. And unfortunately, the people that tend to feel the most weight of that in our lives most of the time are the people we care about the most. It's not just us as much as we'd like that to be the case. And as we look at this story, it needs to impact us because in the midst of all these moments, some being wise, some being unwise, what man intended for wickedness, God intended for good. These prophecies are being fulfilled. It is confirmation time again that Jesus has come and hope is alive. So as you gear up for 2020, what does that look like? Are you walking in wisdom, period, let alone relationally? Are you engaging with people in a way that's God glorifying? Are you extending trust, but are you doing it with wisdom in a timely manner? Are you allowing the proper influences to be in your life? There was a quote, and I can't ever trace it back. I think it was a chaplain who said it. It's one of those things that when you look up a quote and you click like images, for example, on Google, there's like, just so you're clear, like they can put anybody's name at the end of a quote. Like they can do that. That's how that works. And so like you'll look at it, you're like, oh, who said this? 5 different people. Okay, I don't know. Yeah, apparently they are not on the same page about that. But there was a quote that's been said for years and years in this, and it is this. It's, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. I'll update it. Show me your influencers, and I'll show you your future. Because this is a bigger conversation than simply friends. Yes, that is part of it. But who are your influencers? Are they ones that are for you, and far more importantly, for God and what He wants to do in and through you? Or are they ones that are only looking to what they can get from you at the expense of you? Or maybe the expense of people you care about. We have to be careful and learn from this narrative. Not just to go, wow, these magi, these wise men, it's such a cool part of the story. Yay, awesome. I bet they rode camels even though we don't have anything to prove that they did. No, there's more at play here. We have wise men who are demonstrating what it is to be or not be wise. And so my hope is as we gear up for 2020, that you will have wisdom at the forefront of who you want to be and what you want to be the influence in your life and the people you care about. Let's look at that bottom line one more time. If we wish to demonstrate relational wisdom, then we must understand how our personal calling to follow Jesus is in alignment or contrast with the people in our lives. And I might even add to that, and then we have to walk in a way that glorifies God in the wake of that. You need to love on the people who are not in alignment with who God is, because they need Jesus. And if you're there tonight, I'm just telling you, you're searching for something, that's it. It's Jesus. And you need to be that influence in their life. You need to be a positive influence in their life for the glory of the Lord. And if they're in alignment with what you're called to in Jesus, they're following in that, man, get as many people like that as you can around you and walk in it. Jesus is the most amazing example of this. He walked into the most bizarre settings from a religious standpoint. That all the religious leaders were like, why is he going and talking to tax collectors and prostitutes and all these people? Why? Because he wants to be the influence of change. But did he do it alone? No. He brought 12 of his closest people who were walking in alignment with him to what they felt called to. What God was doing and about to do in and through Christ. What does your life look like? Maybe you need to take the next steps today to head towards this understanding of wisdom and godly influence. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I thank you that you are a God who has a plan. And even when I'm not wise, you can still work that towards good. You don't need me to do amazing, powerful, transformational things. But for some reason, you want me to be a part of that story, and I am thankful for it. And I'm thankful that you want everyone in here to be a part of that story. I pray that we will walk in that. I pray that we will be changed by that. And I pray that it will not just affect us, but it will affect all the relationships in our lives. That we will walk in wisdom, and we will glorify you in every part of who we are. May that be the heartbeat of our church as we move into the next year. May we be people who love people for the glory and purposes of Christ Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen.